Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and I hope all of you are having a fantastic day because we have a great show lined up for you where things fell into place just last second, and I'm happy that they did. Today on the show, for the first part, will be an interview with the company Reflare. And if you haven't heard of them, you're in luck. We have none other than the CEO here to tell us all about what they do, how they do it, and I think it's going to be a very good segment. So looking forward to that. Second part of the program, as usual, computer and technology news, where we go over the latest events, stories, news, products, reviews, everything you need to know. We will have it in the second part of the program. Now, with that being said, just real quick, computeramerica.com, that's where you'll find a link to our guest website. That's where you'll find any articles and anything that we talk about here on the program today. You can find them there, as well as just about anything we do here on Computer America, computeramerica.com. Also, be sure to join us in the video chat room over at twitch.tv/computeramerica. And obviously, if you miss any part of it any day, we rebroadcast all this through all the different podcasting services. So you can check that out there. Now, I hope everyone out there is comfy, happy, doing their workday, and ready for some Computer America to finish you out. Now, as I said before, today's guest is none other than Reflare, really looking to hear about, obviously, IT security training. This is something that... if this was taken more seriously, there'd be a lot less companies in the news making headlines for things that they really probably don't want to be making headlines for. So here we go. Joining us by phone is, actually, let me change one thing here, and then we'll be good to go. So joining us by phone right there, say we're good. All right, so joining us by phone is none other than Mr. Paul Ziegler. He is the CEO of the company. And Paul, how you doing?
Doing very well, considering that it's 5 in the morning where I am.
Yeah, I heard about that. You're calling to us from Japan, if I recall correctly, and if I'd known that, we could have worked something out, but I thank you so much for waking up early and doing this.
It's all good. I've been properly caffeinated to a level where I think I should be able to tell you everything you need to know.
Perfect.
without sounding crazy in the meantime. So yes, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, our pleasure, our pleasure. So, this will be, I don't want to say it's the first. Obviously, we've had companies that do training and certifications and things like that. But just from actually, before we get into it, why don't you, from your own mouth, kind of tell us what Reflare is and talk about your role with the company, how long have you been there, and just talk about your mission.
Right. I created Reflare back in 2009, and in the beginning, the goal for the company wasn't all that clear, to be honest. I've been in InfoSec since I was 16, and then slowly went through the usual motions. Spoke at DEF CON, spoke at Black Hat, that kind of thing, until I eventually settled in Japan for a number of reasons. And what ultimately happened was that Reflare in the beginning was simply a shell to offer cybersecurity services to customers to. But as we were doing this, it became more and more clear that many companies have a real issue with their training, concept, to be quite frank. Because what's out there was usually, how do I put this? It was trainings that were designed and built by people who like to tick check boxes. The vast majority of cybersecurity training that you can get right now still, and virtually all of them that you could get 5 years ago, were simply exercises in being able to, for compliance and security reasons, tell some regulator, yes, we told our employees to not do that. And of course, what happens is that no one ever took these. People would skip through them and try the multiple choice exams as many times as possible, or get someone else to do them. Or even if they did learn something, there was no interaction, so the employees forgot it almost instantly. And you know what happens next? There's an incident, and then management blames the employees because, the training said never do this, but of course, they heard it once in the training. It had no interactive component. They forgot it. And that's what we saw over and over again. Combined with the complete lack of training materials available in Japanese, that's where we started out with our first product, RCSD. And it all started from there. We found a lot of traction with D, and then we made another product for administrators. And we've recently come out with one for enterprise-wide rollout. And basically what we're trying to do is to be the no-nonsense training provider in the field. We try to have relatively short, relatively succinct contents. So if you look at many trainings, for example, that teach your PCI DSS compliance, you're often looking at 20 hours-ish of mundane frontal slideshows. We pushed that to around 2 hours. It still covers the same things. Plus, on top of that, you get 1 hour of interactivity where you connect to VMs that we launch for you in the cloud that have exactly the vulnerabilities you've just learned about, and where you have to actively fix or attack a problem. I think we can create a much better retention with the user, because reading about SQL, let's look at SQL injection, for example, because it's such a common issue in recent times. Reading about it or telling an employee, a developer, yes, you should always escape user input, that's all fair and good. But then when they actually get to the point, when they actually see the issue, there won't be a light going off. If they include direct text into a query, there's no visceral response to doing that. But if you've had the experience of being in an actual Linux environment, and to advance, you have to actually inject the code or to actually fix the code, suddenly there's something visceral there. And they might not exactly remember why they have to do this, but they get to the point and they remember, there was something like that. I did something. This matches my actual experience. And at the very least, they look up what the training was. What SQL injection was, and that's how we ultimately intend and to some degree manage to prevent employees from making these mistakes.
So, right off the bat, there's a lot to unpack there. But the first one is that being able to check the box, say that, hey, we've told our employees that they shouldn't be doing X, Y, Z, and yet they still do X, Y, Z. But hey, at least they're covered on paper, saying that we gave them training. How open are different organizations to your method? Because cutting training time down from 20 hours to 2 hours, that sounds well and good for productivity and being able to do it in a day and actually engage people. But at the same time, doesn't it look better, again, kind of on paper? Because if that's what ultimately matters to a lot of companies, doesn't look better on paper to say we trained our employees for 20 hours, these guys only trained them for 2? Like, how much of your certification is kind of, I guess that being trained through security through your through RCSE, I believe is your new product, but like results versus what looks good. Are companies coming around to the idea that if it works, that's better than answering yes, we trained for 20 hours?
That's a good question. That's actually a challenge that we're dealing with on an almost daily basis. The answer is that it's very strongly market dependent. If you're looking at markets like Japan or Europe or the US, where there is a relatively strong drive towards innovation, and the relatively high cultural acceptance of risk, then we find that adoption isn't all that tough. What we usually find is that companies will do small test runs of our product on maybe 100 of their staff and use a competing product or what they've been using so far on another 100. And then they test them, they see how much information was retained, and then they give them a questionnaire asking, did you like the training? Would you recommend it? The usual stuff. And usually when these studies are run on tech people, we have been fortunate to win them overwhelmingly. I can't go into details into the competitors, of course, but the most recent one across a set of 100 developers each trying the RCSD, so the developer training, we ended up with an average score of 4.2, and the close competitor was at 2.8. And for HR, that's usually enough to circumvent their perception that more is better. That said, in some markets, for example, Korea, we haven't cracked it yet because the Korean market is very content focused, and in the Korean market, training, well, basically everything is evaluated by quantity. So if you come in and you have an 800-hour training, and yes, that is something that's apparently on the market, and I don't know what it does, then, well, procurement offices like that, and they go, well, it's 800 hours, and you only have in total 3. Those guys must be better, and yeah, that's why we're not all that active in Korea at the moment.
Yeah, it's it really can be a problem, and but I think thinking of and there's an article that we're going to do today later on in the news segment, but I can bring it up here because I think you might find it interesting. This obviously happened in the United States, but it had worldwide consequences with the Equifax data breach, and they just released their findings through whatever committee that they set up. They set up so many, but and so many of the key findings were the very first point that they laid out was entirely preventable. They failed to fully appreciate and mitigate its cybersecurity risk. Essentially, they had bad passwords. They clicked on email links. They, really didn't do basic training in cybersecurity. So, and I'm sorry for kind of jumping around here, but I have 2 questions. The first one being, who are your who is kind of your target audience within an organization? Is this the everyday employee? Is this just IT? Who is really taking this? And then second of all, what do you think about, and this might be a little disjointed, but what do you think about these reports that, like you said, 800 hours is better than 3 hours, but it seems like in general, no large company is really even taking anything out of, let's say, 800 hours. Like no one's even doing the basics, even if they are trained.
Right. Okay. Let me answer these questions one by one as good as I can. So until recently, until about a month ago, I would have to answer your first question with that we're targeting technology employees, meaning developers, system security people, and administrators. That said, at the beginning of the month, we launched an offering specifically for non-technical people and for much wider deployment, which still uses our core competencies of keeping things short while trying to hit a much wider audience with topics such as, phishing prevention or how to create secure passwords. Because believe it or not, those are the topics that are actually important. And that leads me into your second part of all of these big companies getting hacked through these ridiculously simple methods. To tell you the truth, from an InfoSec is what I wanted to say. From an information security perspective, that's not all that surprising. Due to the way that cybersecurity is portrayed in the media, from Hollywood to news, there's this false perception that it's incredibly high tech, that attackers sit in some rooms and they unleash the zero-day exploits onto the unsuspecting system, and they go only after high-value targets, and they have a plan, and they're all semi-autistic masterminds. That's the image that's being created. The reality is much more boring. The vast majority of breaches occur because of social engineering or because of bad passwords. That's it. That's 80% of the cybersecurity risk out there, if I have to guess. And then the rest are things like heavily out-of-date software versions, and that was also something that Equifax had to deal with. So the overwhelming number of cybersecurity incidents could be prevented with relatively easy tools, with relatively easy compliance training if it actually hit and if it actually stuck in the employee's mind, and relatively easy maintenance on systems. But it's not taking place. And instead, what we're always hearing about are company level incident response teams, or cybersecurity as a countrywide affair. All of these things, and they're very important, because if you want to defend against an actual APT that's actually out there to break into a high value system like a bank backend or a company's energy grid, those are the tools you need. And I think we'll see more of them in the future. But right now, literally all you need to do to stay secure is keep your basics covered. And that brings me to something that, if you're following Reflare's newsletters, is a topic in almost every single one of our weekly briefings. People seem to confuse security with a binary problem. People seem to think that something is either secure or not secure. And if it's secure, then, well, you did a good job. And if it's not secure, then, well, you should have done a better job and you deserve getting hacked. But that's a dangerous view to take, because security is always an analog problem. It's always on a scale. If I have a budget of $1 billion, nothing is safe. And this is something that we're seeing over and over with the adoption of cryptocurrencies, because suddenly you have these targets where a company holds assets that are perfectly liquid, that an attacker can literally steal by him or herself in seconds, worth, well, $1 billion, $2 billion. If that gives the attacker an attack budget of $500 million, they can buy a zero-day exploit for any system. They can bribe anyone who's supposed to do it. And even if you put your data center into some cave somewhere in Bolivia with a military guard in front, $100 million buys a militia. At some point, the cost of protecting something in the cyberspace becomes prohibitively expensive. So there's no way to make something perfectly secure. You can only ever make things appropriately secure. And in this industry, it usually means that to be a secure company, whatever your sector is, whether it's insurance or banking or credit checks, you have to be more secure than your next competitor in the field. As long as there's someone who's easier to hack, they'll probably go down first.
Right. And of course, as we say on the show, it's not about outrunning the bear. It's just about outrunning your friend. It's not making yourself a bit more of a secure target. They're not going to hit their head against that wall. They're just going to find someone else who didn't put up the wall in the first place. Makes perfect sense. Yeah, and makes perfect sense. But it's those very glaring, obvious. And we used to have our co-host here used to be trained in the military in the United States. He held all government positions and blah blah blah, and he remembers giving these seminars on how to train people, in person, looking these people in the eyes and go, "Don't let someone you don't know into your computer." And then the next day, he would have a friend come in a suit with a USB stick and go, "Hey, I'm from corporate. I need to get onto your computer. Could you log in for me? I need to install something." And they would do it like 24 hours later. You mentioned that you have these things set up, and I actually did find that very interesting to see these vulnerabilities in action live. As they learn about them. Talk about your training and kind of the hands-on experience, because that's something I haven't heard of before.
Okay. So when we talk about Reflare's training, we have to talk about two separate systems. We have 3 training programs at the moment, but they largely fall into different systems. The first thing we do is what we do with the developer and administrator training. And what happens there is you get your account from your team administrator, set your password, log in, and you see your first available lesson, which is always going to be an intro lesson. And it will give you a short video explaining in the language of your choice right now, that is English, Korean, or Japanese, but we're expanding to others quickly, how to use the training and why there is a virtual machine link to it. What then happens is you hit the Give Me My Challenge button, and in the back end, we boot up a VM just for you. So it's just for this challenge and just for you, and it's ready within a minute or so. And then we do some trickery on the back end to render the browser, to render the desktop of that virtual machine, which runs Ubuntu, into your browser without plugins. It's ultimately rendered in HTML5, and all of the data is sent over XML RPC calls. So what you end up with is an actual Linux system, but you interact with it through your browser, kind of how you would usually use a VNC client. And in that system, we have prepared a sort of challenge for you in the style that you might be familiar with in capture the flag competitions at hacking conferences. So you have a system, and let's say you've just learned about cross-site scripting. It was a video, and the video went over all the details and showed you, well, you entered something here, and that's why in the PHP code it ends up here, and then in the rendered HTML it ends up there, and that's why it's being executed, and that's why you shouldn't do that. So a very basic introduction to how an attack flow works for cross-site scripting and why it happens. And then we throw you into a challenge VM that runs a very, very simple forum software. It's basically a facsimile of how actual forums work, but it has all of the moving parts. It's an actual application written in PHP, going into a MySQL database, running on actual metal. And your task is to inject an alert box saying security matters. That's the actual challenge. You have to go in, you have to go to the forum, click down to create a new account, enter the appropriate script code, hit enter, and in the back end, we're always pinging the server to see if the attack code has shown up. And as soon as it does, we give you a flag, and the flag then unlocks the next lesson. And in the next lesson, we'll show you how cross-site scripting is prevented, why it's not a good idea to simply filter quotes or brackets, why you should be very careful with any user input. All of these things, a number of different approaches, and then we throw you into a second VM where a very similar application is running, but this time you don't have access to you do have access to the user interface, but what's important is you have access to the source code, and you have to fix it. And at the same time, we have a bot running that constantly checks, can we still do cross-site scripting? Yes, no. And even if cross-site scripting doesn't succeed, it also checks if the application is still working. Because what we found out in the beginning that, of course, if you give people a hacking training and you tell them make sure this application is no longer vulnerable to cross-site scripting, the very first thing, a significant part of a user state would be to just delete all the code, and then kind of coyly claim, well, it's not vulnerable anymore. It's like, yeah, it doesn't do the thing anymore either. But points taken, we should probably add code to protect against that. So basically, we make sure that the application that you are given is still doing what it's supposed to do as a very easy core functionality, and it's not vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And if that happens, you get a next flag, and you advance to the next lesson, which in that case would be SQL injection. That's the very basic flow. If you mess up at any time, you can always restart the challenges. All of the changes are discarded instantly. And if you make it to the last lesson, you've already demonstrated that you know what you're doing, because you have to. While none of these challenges are on the level of what you would find in like a CTF competition, they still force you to actively engage with the matter. They force you to think about how the code what the code does, how it interacts with the input to create the issue that you're trying to prevent. So by doing these very easy things, we can focus the developer in this case to actively parse what we're telling them over the video. And that is what we find has a much more engaging effect, because developers now feel like they're doing something productive instead of answering sometimes asinine multiple choice questions.
Right.
And at the same time, this practical experience of seeing it work, like just dumping a database once changes a person, because until then, SQL injection would be an abstract, something they know about in books, and they know the answer in books, but they have no visceral understanding of it. And in one of our challenges, we let them dump the database, and we let them see all of the data that's stored in there, even though it's not the same account. Of course, it's prepared data for the challenge itself, but that, we're told over and over again by people whose feedback we asked for, has a visceral impact on them. Because even though they knew it was possible, they never saw it, and after they're seeing it, they treat SQL injection differently.
No, obviously there's something to be said for actually doing it. I am much the same way myself, and I think a lot of people as well. You can be told, a dozen different times that this is what you're going to run into, but until you actually see it, until you actually deal with it, it doesn't click. So I can see where
Right.
that obvious, and like you said, there's that's for developers. And then I see here where anyone out there watching the video portion, we are checking out the your website right now. You also have
Right.
you also have administrator, basics, and employee. And if you just want
Yes.
to cover those real quick and how they differ.
Sure. Administrator is basically the same technology as developer. It runs on CentOS instead of Ubuntu just because that's what our customers requested. It's the exact same pattern. Apart from that, Basics is a product that we're actually phasing out now that the employee offering has been released. Basics is basically the developer training without the virtual machines because some customers wanted to roll it out to tens of thousands of people and thought that the machines, were not a good cost proposition for them. We obliged. We think the virtual machines are what makes it worth it, but the customer is always right. And E is our newest offering. What E is it deviates a little bit from the format that you've seen in D and A, which means we're no longer using virtual machines, but we're still trying to give the employee a training that's worthwhile. And what we've done for that is we've made a product that's hyper customizable. Let me try to explain what I mean by that. One of the issues that we face or that anyone faces when they do compliance training, especially the kind of you must have a safe password, that kind of thing, is that it's dry and very unspecific. Because usually you'll get some training from a vendor. It often enough comes in the format of a PowerPoint slide deck that you have to click through. And it will tell you, always create a secure password and it must do this. It must be uppercase and lowercase and at least one special character and at least 8 characters long. But then you're in a company that has a 10-character minimum requirement because, that's how it's always been. Or you're in a company that requires 2 capital characters. Or you're in a company that is completely liberal about your password policies and only says as long as it's 12 characters or more. Or you're in a company that forbids you to put a real word into the password even if it's been modified, and so on and so on. What you end up with is the problem that employees are told one thing by rather general training, and then they're supposed to adhere to corporate policy, which may say something completely different. So what we try to do is leverage some of the technology that Amazon and Google have been pushing out in the realm of text-to-speech. So all of our trainings are narrated, and the developer and administrator training are narrated by professional voice actors. But for the employee training, we went in a different direction, and we actually created text like TTS markup text for that. So TTS markup text means that instead of giving plain text to an engine that then creates voice out of it, it's actually marked up to say, read this as a number and read this as individual digits instead of a phone number, leave a short pause here, emphasis on that sentence. And it actually creates reasonably well-sounding output. Our goal was for it to be indistinguishable. We're not quite there yet. However, to most non-natives at this point, the voices that are generated sound like a human voice or like a non-computerized voice. And even to native speakers, we found that the voices are acceptable. They're not garing anymore as they were 5 years or so ago when listening to a computer voice was just hell. And what that has allowed us is to give the company administrators a backend where they can add content to our training in real time. So let's say we're on a module about password security, and we go over the same basics. Hey, here's what we think secure passwords should be like. Either make up something really, really random, at least 8 characters, mix and match, and nothing, and not based on any real world words. Or you could use this other technique where you take 5 to 6 completely random words, use a random word generator if you have to, you make up a small story in your mind so you remember them, and then you string them together because you'll end up with a decent amount of entropy. as long as the words are not, the opening to a Shakespeare book.
Right.
And it has some drawbacks too, but at least these passwords are really easy to remember. And you will have to figure out what works best for you. Now, if I was a company and I had a preference on one of these, I could then simply go into the admin interface, add a slide, and say, at company X, our guideline is you have to do the latter. We prohibit you from doing mix and match passwords, and all of our passwords have to be 5-word passwords, and thus at least 28 characters long, something like that. And you could put your voice track on there as well. And from a user's perspective, that slide would fit in perfectly. It would be the same design. It would be the same voice narrating it. And so you can add your actual specific contents into our content to make sure that your employees get something that doesn't contradict what they're actually working with in the everyday.
That's actually super nice. And actually, Paul, I'm going to stop right there. And I'm not sure if you're okay with this, but we have to go to break. Would you mind saying over so we can continue our conversation?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect.
Of course.
Perfect. So everyone, we are talking to Mr. Paul Ziegler. He is the CEO of a company called Reflare. You can check them out, reflare.com. Also link to it at computeramerica.com. Everyone, we'll be right back. More Computer America right after this. Everyone, stay tuned.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. 800-215-4461. That's 800-215-4461.
We are all Brother Wolf. 10 years ago, a group of locals banded together to create positive change. We took animals into our homes, held adoption events at local retailers, and talked to the community about our mission to help build a no-kill Asheville. A decade later, we have achieved so many victories for animals in need. There's been so much progress, yet there's still so much to do. As part of our year-long celebration, we encourage you to become a member of our special Compassionate Circle program. With a monthly donation of $10 or more, you will have behind-the-scenes access to the work we are doing at Brother Wolf. Our goal is to reach 1,000 members because we receive no government funding. Working together, we can help build and sustain no-kill communities. Learn more at compassionatecircle.bwar.org. We are a 501c3 tax-deductible organization.
Welcome back to the Computer America Show. It is 32 minutes past the hour, and we continue on here. We are talking with Reflare, Mr. Paul Ziegler, CEO. And by the way, everyone, if you missed any part of our conversation so far, very, very interesting. You can, of course, check out Computer America wherever podcasts are heard, Google, iTunes, as well as things like iHeartRadio, obviously the big ones. And yeah, you'll hear today's show in its entirety rebroadcast after the program. So yeah, we continue on. Paul, again, thank you for staying here with us. And yeah, we kind of had to interrupt you, but you were kind of going through how companies can really personalize these modules because, it's one thing to have, let's say you fully support the idea of a 10-character password, but a company is being really, really safe and secure and wants to do a 16, and you don't want to, give contradicting information that really kind of tears people away from the idea that not everything I'm learning is actually applicable, and you can change that, like you said, as you want. And by the way, I'm kind of going through your website here, and I've seen this kind of thing before. I've seen it with, when I was a bit younger, I was doing online classes, online schooling, the idea of modules especially for things like a second language. This is very familiar to me, and going through that, I'm just saying personally, it's really a great way to learn because sometimes, let's say I'm trying to learn a second language. I have taken extended breaks because I'm lazy. One of these days I'm going to learn German. It's going to happen. But I fully like the idea that I can go back and start back at lesson 1 for a refresher, and I can go 1, 2, 3, 4. If I'm jumping in and out, I know that there's a huge incentive to sit there and get through, let's say, here on your website, let's say all 13 modules in one sitting. But if you ever do get torn away or something doesn't quite click with you, you can just do the module over again. It's have you found that to be effective for people using this? Like, do they enjoy the modules?
Absolutely, and we are also seeing exactly what you've just mentioned, which is that people take the training, and then they go about their lives and about their work, and then they come back half a year later, and we see people specifically accessing modules at that time. And what we interpret that to mean is that they ran into an issue. They, some of their alerts got triggered, and they thought, hey, this looks like one of those things that I learned about. That looks like command injection. I thought that was that Reflare thing. And they come back and they go specifically to the command injection module. They rewatch the video, they redo the challenge, and then we hope they make the right decision afterwards. And that's one of the reasons why I'm fighting tooth and nail against everyone in our company that wants to sell, because they also correctly point out that removing access to users quickly after they finish the training is the economically right thing to do. But I'm a techie, and to me, retaining that access for everyone so that they can actually come back when they need it and just see the same contents again for free is part of the offering. Now, if the company wants them to retake the training, we charge a fee for that. We charge a fee, for the ability to once again monitor your employees, for the ability to do all the enforcement, to do all of the back end. But if an individual employee wants to come and revisit a lesson a year or even 3 years later, that's perfectly fine with us. Or actually, the system is set up to explicitly allow it.
So tell us about this, this next part of your service, and I'm going to ramble off some letters. I hope that you clarify this because even I'm a little lost on this one. PCIe DSS 3.2, what the heck, and what service is this, and what do you do with it?
I see you're going along our website. We do have consulting services that help companies deal with PCI DSS requirements. PCI DSS, for those unfamiliar, is a standard by the payment card industry specifying certain things that have to happen within the company or organization to be considered secure enough to handle credit card data. PCI DSS is noteworthy because it's a relatively old standard. It's about a decade old at this point, I think. While being very specific. I think in the information security world, everyone knows of ISO 27001, but I think few people know just how short the entire ISO 27001 document is. Like if you go through the hoops, you sign up and you pay your membership fee to get access to the actual ISO document. I think it was 4 pages. It might have been 6, but that's the range that's what we're looking at, and it's all structured in a way that says, you need to make your own incident response plan. You need to define security zones. You need to make sure that you have adequate training for your company. And that's all great stuff. It's just not very actionable. And PCI DSS stands out from that because PCI DSS is very specific. It's very specific in a way that says, hey, you need to teach all of your employees that touch code these 25 topics. You have to teach them. That's it. That's your training requirement. If you want to teach them more, that's fine. But if you want to be compliant, here's the 25 topics that you need to teach them. And we find that these topics cover a lot of ground. Now, the reason we work with PCI DSS is that a lot of our customers work with PCI DSS, and that our developer training is, among other things, designed to fulfill the training requirements of PCI DSS for tech employees. At the same time, we regularly run into customers who are under no sort of compliance framework. You're looking at, for example, small online shops that don't accept their own credit cards. They just integrate someone like Stripe. Right. Or we're looking at small medical startups. And, cybersecurity is obviously very important, but the only thing that they're real under is HIPAA. And HIPAA is not really good about telling you what to do in terms of cybersecurity. They're good to tell you. They're good in terms of telling you what data you have to protect and what you should not be doing. Like, don't share your patient's data. But they don't really teach you how. So we often recommend people look at PCI DSS as sort of a guideline for what a practical, applied information security compliance framework should look like. And then if they're not currently under a compliance requirement, modeling their own policy after the rules set up in PCI DSS is often a good and cost-effective step for small companies to get their, I want to use a swear there, but to get their act together, let's put it that way.
Right, and obviously we're going to switch topics here a little bit and talk about CES is coming up. It's just under a month away. There are a lot of companies. We're inviting a lot of companies on the show. We're seeing a lot of different ideas come out, but I will say that this year I'm fully expecting CES to be full of obviously a lot of services, but not only that, smart toys are going to be huge. The Internet of Things, connected homes, all these different devices. And traditionally, security has not been a priority for these companies. Either services who provide a continuous, need some kind of continuous security, or really just baked in security into these Internet devices. Just from your point of view, and obviously being in this field, what are some of the biggest cyber risk for these companies that that we're going to be seeing going into the future?
That's a good question. Let me try to answer it in their own language. Because before I went into information security, I was heavily involved in the startup scene. Mm-hmm. Companies that deal in these very, very novel products usually try to create something called an MVP, a minimum viable product, which is the minimum thing you can make before you can start selling it. And then the idea is you make your MVP, that's what your investment is for, you start selling it, and then you finance the ongoing development of your product from the MVP's revenue. And unfortunately, and I think this is one of the biggest problems facing these young industries, the vast majority of CEOs in that field do not consider information security to be a necessary part of the MVP product. Cybersecurity is literally an afterthought. So let's say someone is making smart coffee maker. Cybersecurity is not high on their agenda. They think of it as something that can be added on later. What's important is, does it work with Alexa? Does it work with Siri? What's also important is, does it make coffee? All of these things that are important to the consumer. But what happens is you build these devices without security in mind, and then you try to retrofit security into them at a later point. But oftentimes that just doesn't work, because security isn't only a software issue; it can also often be a hardware issue. So let's say you build a device, and the Bluetooth chips that you build into it, you just went with the lowest bidder. And even at the time when you bought them, the reason why the chips were so cheap was because a huge vulnerability was just discovered in them that allowed anyone to associate with these chips without going through the pairing process. But, well, you didn't care about cybersecurity at the time. So now 10,000 of your units run with that chip, and there's literally nothing you can do about it. And the good business decision at that point is clearly to cover it up and hope no one ever finds out. And that's horrible for consumers. But at the same time, if you just release your MVP and 10,000 of your 15,000 test devices basically have to be recalled, admitting the problem is corporate suicide. And your investors will rightfully kick you off whatever function you're holding. So I think that's the biggest issue we're facing in these new markets. It's that information security is tedious, and it's also expensive from a talent pool perspective. And so many of the young companies don't invest money into it until they grow bigger. But at that point, it might just be too late, because
I do have to say that something that I've noticed just from kind of my point of view, consumer, and just seeing the market play out when it comes to security. And this was really a thing when home security was really getting off a couple years ago, and the idea that you have a webcam set up somewhere in your home and you can check the webcam wherever you want. This was even before Ring and things like that. But you're talking about hardware and security. I mean, name any reputable company that you can from the United States, but they have all their overhead, and then they could try to make a secure product. But then at the same time, they're competing in a marketplace where you see a product from a company you don't know. It's obviously made in China, and security is literally zero. Like, all of them come with a default password of password or admin, and they're all shipped out. There's zero patching that will ever be done. And really, to the end consumer, I hope that, through programs such as ours, and, you're definitely fighting the fight on your end too, but security was not a thing a couple years ago, where they saw the price difference of something from a reputable company, $50, or something from a new company that they've never heard of, and that was $20. And that's another fight, is that, like you said, if you're looking for a minimum viable product, there are companies out there that do not care about their longevity and just want to make a quick dollar.
And even if you were to go with a reputable company and with their consumer level gear 5 years ago, there's a good chance that you'd end up with password.
That's true.
I don't want to go into vendor names, but I've had audits as recently as 5 years ago where vendors, top tier network gear vendors, you would know their names, had their admin interface secured with JavaScript, like literally JavaScript saying if password equals, and then there's the password if you just view the source of the page. That was a thing until 5 years ago. So information security really only took off somewhere around 2013. That's when people started noticing, hey, we should be paying attention to this. And it was mostly due to a number of large hacks.
Yeah.
Like, the year Sony got hacked 4 times in a row. And similar things. Those caught the media attention, and those caught consumer attention because suddenly the breaches were so large that actual people that you knew, or even yourself, were affected. And Equifax was the next step up from that, because Equifax put pretty much everyone living in the U.S. at risk. And so people are much more aware of cybersecurity, and they're suddenly pushing for it. So we are no longer going to see the major brand doing a JavaScript-based authentication mechanism, but we're still seeing a lot of other things that are not too far away. Information security certainly still has a long way to go.
It certainly does, and that's, I think, a good kind of turning point for our conversation. And we can switch this to Reflare. You guys are coming out with your standards, and obviously getting the word out that, hey, if you go with us, then you're going to be protected from. Or at least you're going to be safer, or your employees are going to be better trained to deal with real world situations than if they did what's traditionally been out there. Because I think it's very clear from every company to every individual that traditional methods aren't working. There are a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes, but I'm glad that people are waking up to the idea that, security, it's everyone's job. It's not just IT's department. It's everyone. So there's a lot to do, and that's what I'm going to ask you over at Reflare. What do you guys have? What are you guys going to do next? Is it just more training programs? Is it deeper training programs? What's next for Reflare?
What's next on our agenda is adding more topics to our employee line of trainings. Right now, we've rolled out what we call the core modules, which are the ones that we think everyone should probably take at least once in their life. But we're slowly adding more obscure modules. We're adding modules to cover GDPR regulations. We're adding modules covering various other payment standard regulations, just because that's what our customers are asking for. We're also going to scale that slowly across regions and languages. So we intend to launch the full offering in German. Funny that you mentioned your desire to learn German a few minutes ago. In the early in the next year, and then we intend to branch out into Japanese because we have a lot of existing business over here as well. So we're going to scale it on content, and we're going to scale it on languages, and hopefully, as time goes by, we'll be able to provide more and more modules for people who need them. Because right now, of course, we think we have a good product. I think we have a good product, but we are not able to cover everything right now. But eventually, we want to get there. We want to we want to make sure that if you're a company and you need to train your staff, you can come to us to get a reasonable, no-nonsense solution that fits what you're actually doing, instead of bombarding your employees with 10 hours of random trivia about what they should be doing with information security.
Right, and yeah, I'm not telling you how to run your company or anything like that, but I will say that a lot of a lot of the other security standards that we've seen, they really become the de facto standard when they pair with a large organization. When they go, let's say Microsoft is RCSE compliant, then so maybe in the future we'll definitely see your company, saying, hey, we follow X amount of compliance. Everyone in our organization. I mean, it's just really getting the word out. It's not the easiest thing to do, and especially when it's something like cybersecurity. It's getting people to just at least hear your call letters and say, oh, hey, at least that's good. That's a good thing that they work with Reflare, that kind of thing. So.
Yes. Absolutely. We are in the process of getting there. We've only moved into the American market about a year ago. We do have some large name customers in the Japanese market, fortunately, where we first rolled out our first trials. But yes, you're absolutely right. Getting these big companies behind your product and getting them to be secure enough to announce to the world that they're using the product is definitely what has helped us most in the past, and which I hope will help us again in the American and European markets in the near future.
I look forward to hearing about it. So I'll leave you last word. Anything else you want to tell our audience about Reflare, about security, about startups, about anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, sure. Let me take this chance to just once more reiterate the problem of analog security, as we call it.
Sure.
If anyone tells you that their product can make you secure, that just buy from us, give us money, we'll give you software or a black box or whatever, and you plug it in and you're secure, they're lying. They are absolutely lying. And I know that means about everyone in the market is lying, but it's unfortunately the truth. Computer security is incredibly complex, and usually
Paul, I'm sorry, Paul, can you hear us? Oh no, we might have lost Paul. Oh wait. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul, can you hear me? Oh no. All right, everyone. So obviously here, running in the background, our internet got knocked out. I don't know what's up with that, but hopefully we'll be able to, reconnect everything. So let's see. So obviously we're going to have to hang up on that. So our interview today, again, was with a company called Reflare, and Paul Ziegler, he was kind enough to join us. He is the CEO of the company. Happy that he was to join us so early in the morning where he is located. But in the meantime, everyone, I want to say thank you so much for him joining us. We'll have to reach out to him via email and really deal with that after the show here. But yeah, in the meantime, everyone, computer and technology news. Why don't we go ahead, play the tone, and start talking about some news? So here we go. Computer and technology news brought to you by Computer America. So the first thing that I want to cover, and really this might be all we have time to to actually cover, and again I apologize for kind of losing our guests here, but in the meantime, the interview was just about wrapped up, and let's start off with we mentioned during the interview. I want to cover after the interview as well. This has to do with the key findings and, of course, the report from the committee releases report revealing new information on the Equifax data breach. The Equifax data breach, one of the largest, massive, most publicized data breaches in history, and I want to, of course, keep up to date with exactly what they're finding. So this came from the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Republicans released a staff report after the committee's 14-month investigation into the Equifax data breach, one of the largest data breaches in U.S. history. Absolutely. They said that they reviewed over 122,000 documents. That's a lot of documents. conducted transcribed interviews with 3 former Equifax employees directly involved with IT, and met with numerous current and former employees of the company, in addition to Mandiant, the forensic firm hired to investigate the breach. Makes sense. So that's why we are now looking at this report, saying that the key findings, and we're going to talk about the key findings and then the recommendations that they have. But this is the big thing here, where the first thing and the most prominent thing, as we said, entirely preventable. Equifax failed to fully appreciate and mitigate its cybersecurity risk. Had the company taken action to address its observable security issues, the data breach could have been prevented. Unfortunate. The next thing said that there was a lack of accountability and management structure, saying that Equifax failed to implement clear lines of authority within their internal IT management structure, leading to an execution gap between IT policy and operation. Ultimately, the gap restricted the company's ability to implement security initiatives in a comprehensive and timely manner. Now, to a lot of companies, that would seem very obvious. Let's say you have 3 full-time IT employees on staff. One is in charge of actually setting the standards, and they set everything up, and then the other 2 execute it as best they can. With a company as large as Equifax, where they were handling so much data in so many different countries in so many different ways, had to be compliant with everyone, and they were sending data left and right, collecting data. It really is one of those things that, let's see, and I think we're back online. So let's see, so reconnect. And yeah, I think we should be good to go about now. Yeah, now, but we're just going to go ahead and continue on here with the show, and then we'll, anyone out there who missed the show, we can, of course, actually, we might, no. All right, so yeah, and continuing on here, they're saying that with a company as large as Equifax, my point here is, of course, the fact that no one was in charge of, again, according to a report, of setting the standard, and there was no clear way to implement this across the board. It's a real problem. You have to, you have to really, kind of focus that IT just wasn't a priority. To Equifax, IT was not a priority. That's about as far as that goes. The next was failed to implement responsible security measurements. And those security measurements, they said that Equifax allowed over 300 security certificates to expire, including 79 certificates for monitoring business critical domains. Failure to renew and expire digital certificates for 19 months left Equifax without visibility in the exfiltration of data during the time of the cyber attack. Okay, there's no denying that one. That one sounds really bad, and that's because it is. It's horrible that they allowed their security certificates to expire. Anyone could have come and used any one of those expired certificates to to penetrate, to monitor, to inject anything that they wanted to. Really, it's a shock that Equifax wasn't hacked earlier at this point. And then the last key finding was that unprepared to support affected consumers, Equifax, should be pretty obvious, after everyone's data was lost, after everything happened, well, they just didn't have any reasonable way to mitigate the damage, to just help people after the data that they, in a lot of cases, didn't explicitly give Equifax, because Equifax is one of the 3 big credit agencies. They collect data, but you never really sign a paper saying that Equifax is allowed to collect my data. Equifax did not have a way to come around and say, hey, we're sorry about that. Or not even apologize, but to rectify the situation. After they apologize, they have to fix what they broke, and they did not do that. They had no plan in place to do that. The recommendation here, and then this should carry us out through the end of the show. As one of the largest consumer reporting agencies in the United States, Equifax has a heightened sense of responsibility to protect consumer data. The government also plays a key role in partnering with the private sector to prevent and mitigate cyber attacks. They said that the committee's report details 7 recommendations to protect consumers, increase oversight, accountability, transparency, modernize IT security solutions. These recommendations will require the work of Congress, the executive branch, and the private sector. Essentially, what they're advocating for there are increased regulations to set a standard for regulations when it comes to cybersecurity, really for some of these companies that they deem necessary. And when they say necessary, I think Equifax is a good example of one that should really be regulated. It's crucial. We saw a huge impact, and we will continue to see a huge impact from this. And if there's any company you're going to, that you're actually going to monitor and make sure that this works, Equifax is a good one. Everyone, we're about done here. Sorry for the disconnect in the middle, but in the meantime, everyone have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Computer America. Tune in tomorrow. Let's check our calendar, where we should have none other than Sandy Berger. And we're going to be talking about some maybe gift ideas. I don't know. Sandy Berger, she's always a fun segment. You should check it out. 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday. In the meantime, have a great day. Thank you. And again, thank you to Reflare for joining us on the program. Everyone, have a good one. Bye-bye.